there's one thing that the human race is good at, it's at killing each other. Whether it's over land, politics or religion, humankind will likely never stop going to war. In this video, we're taking a look at some of the most significant and bloody battles to have ever taken place. From a mighty clash between the allies of Germany in World War I to the Gargantuan battle which put a new king on the English throne, we take a look at 5 of the bloodiest single-day battles in human history. Number 5. The first day of the Somme. The Battle of the Somme was one of the bloodiest military campaigns in human history. Throughout the whole campaign, there were around 1 million casualties, with around 20,000 British men killed in the first day alone. The Anglo-French offensive had the intention of driving back German forces and reclaiming the Somme region of France. Unfortunately, prior to the battle, the French suffered massive losses at the Battle of Verdun, and consequently, the British were forced into the Somme offensive as a means of drawing German forces away from Verdun and giving the French some much needed respite. Prior to the Allied invasion of Somme, the British bombarded the German lines with artillery for 8 days. It was hoped that this would weaken the enemy fortifications and destroy their underground bunkers. Unfortunately, this bombardment proved unsuccessful, due mainly to faulty munitions. When on the morning of the 1st of July 1916, the Allies began their ground assault of the Somme, it was clear that the Germans were well prepared for this battle and not ready to merely back down. Allied forces expecting little opposition were ordered to walk towards the enemy trenches and were literally mowed down by German machine gun fire. Although some British troops managed to reach the German trenches, this was far from the decisive victory the Allies had hoped for. By the end of this tragic first day, Britain alone had suffered 60,000 casualties. The Battle of the Somme was a devastating blow to Britain and has gone down in history as one of the most tragic battles ever. By the end of the campaign, there had been well over 1 million casualties. So many lives were lost for such little gain, and it's hard to imagine the horror experienced by those involved. Number 4. The Battle of Cannae. The Battle of Cannae was a monumental clash between the mighty forces of Rome and Carthage. Often considered the greatest battle in history, up to 75,000 people lost their lives. Following years of animosity between the mighty empires of Rome and Carthage, commonly known as the Punic Wars, the Carthaginian general Hannibal amassed a mighty army which he marched across the Pyrenees and Alps and into Italy. This army, which included elephants, took on the Roman Empire and won 2 decisive victories at Trebia and Lake Trasimene. As a consequence of these crushing defeats, Rome amassed a gargantuan army of up to 90,000 troops in an attempt to stop Hannibal's army tearing through Italy. Hannibal was confronted by Rome outside the town of Cannae, and 2 mighty armies faced off against each other. The Romans, with their superior numbers, believed they could merely defeat Hannibal through brute force alone. They were very much mistaken. Hannibal was an incredible tactician and ended up luring the Roman army into a trap and fully encircling them. This allowed Hannibal to attack from all sides and led to a crushing Roman defeat. The Battle of Cannae taught Rome a lot about military strategy and has gone down in history as one of the most significant battles ever. Number 3. The Battle of Antietam. The Battle of Antietam was a defining moment in the American Civil War and resulted in the loss of approximately 23,000 men. As a consequence, this extremely violent campaign is recognised as the bloodiest ever single-day battle in American history. The 2 armies involved were huge. The Confederate General Robert E. Lee commanded about 38,000 troops, with the Unionist Army commanded by General George McClellan consisting of a much superior 75,000. This was the first major battle within Unionist territory and General Lee's first invasion of the northern states. Both armies squared up against each other across the Antietam Creek, and although it looked like General McClellan had the upper hand, things were not so clear-cut. Outnumbered 2-1, General Lee was not prepared to back down, and although his battle plans had been leaked to the Unionists, he put up one hell of a fight. As hostilities began, Unionist strategy broke down and resulted in several uncoordinated advances against the Confederates, who were initially pushed back, resulting in massive losses. After 8 hours of fierce fighting, Confederate reinforcements arrived and they were able to resist a second Unionist attack. By sunset that day, the battlefield was riddled with bodies and painted a deep red from all the bloodshed. Both sides still held their ground, and although there was no clear winner, General Lee reluctantly turned his troops back to Virginia in what was viewed as a success for the Unionists. The battle set the scene for Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Declaration and paved the way to end slavery in America. The Battle of Antietam holds huge significance and will go down in history as one of the bloodiest ever fought. Number 2. The Battle of Borodino. In the summer of 1812, Napoleon Bonaparte invaded Russia. His intention was to bring Russia under control and demand their cooperation against Britain. Intending on quickly engaging the Russian army and bringing the whole excursion to a swift conclusion, Napoleon was frustrated to find the Russians retreating back inland, scorching the earth as they went and destroying any supplies which could have been pillaged by his army. Napoleon's Gargantuan army of 130,000 troops continued to pursue the Russians, but in doing so found their supply lines being badly stretched. Eventually, the Russians halted their retreat at the town of Borodino, about 70 miles west of Moscow, and Napoleon finally got his battle. What ensued was the bloodiest single-day battle of the Napoleonic Wars. Unusually for Napoleon, he remained particularly cautious when committing his troops, deciding not to outflank the Russians and refusing to commit further reinforcements. Napoleon attacked the opposing army head-on, resulting in massive losses on both sides. It's reckoned around 30,000 French and 45,000 Russian soldiers lost their lives. By nightfall, both sides were battered and exhausted, and the Russian forces reluctantly withdrew from the battlefield. This consequently resulted in the loss of Moscow, but was not a clear-cut win for Napoleon. Ultimately, the Russians were able to regroup and later drove Napoleon out of Russia, ending the war. Due to the huge size of the armies involved, in terms of lives lost, Borodino is considered one of the bloodiest battles in human history. Number 1. The Battle of Talton. The Battle of Talton was the accumulation of years of struggle between the royal houses of York and Lancaster. The incompetence of the Lancastrian king Henry VI led his cousin Richard, Duke of York, to take action, and what resulted was a violent power struggle which became known as the Wars of the Roses. When Richard lost his life at the Battle of Wakefield, his son Edward, Earl of March, continued the Yorkist campaign with ferocity. On Palm Sunday, 1461, two mighty armies faced off against each other in a frozen field near to the village of Talton in North Yorkshire. The conditions were extremely grave. Caught in the midst of a violent snowstorm, soldiers on both sides were freezing cold, wet and hungry. What would follow would be the most brutal and bloody battle ever to be fought on British soil. Edward immediately took advantage of the strong wind, sending a barrage of arrows towards his enemy. This forced the Lancastrians to attack head-on, and so began hours of brutal hand-to-hand fighting. A defining moment came when the Lancastrian line was pivoted through 45 degrees, resulting in them being pushed back into a flooded marsh. The Lancastrians started to rout, but there was nowhere to run. Those who attempted to cross the beck drowned. Those attempting to escape were hacked down by Edward's cavalry. So much blood was shed that the rivers around the battlefield were said to flow with blood for several days after the battle. Edward had won his crown and Henry forced into exile. In 1996, a mass grave was found containing skeletons of soldiers which had suffered horrific injuries at Talton. One skeleton was found with 8 devastating wounds to its skull, the skull itself split in two. Other skulls were found with holes punched through their foreheads, likely caused by the poleaxe, a brutal hand-to-hand weapon which contained a spike on one side and a blade on the other. It was clear that these soldiers had been butchered, with some having their faces split open and their ears and noses torn off. 28,000 soldiers died at Talton, making it the bloodiest single-day battle in British history. Due to the manner in which the soldiers were butchered, it is obvious to see why this often forgotten about battle is considered one of the most horrific and devastating battles in human history.